In school, we are usually taught the boring parts of math, history, and science, but everything wacky and cool was left out to preserve your youthful mind. Not here. From government poisonings to Pepsi's own military force, we're about to teach you how presidents got shot, not Lincoln, rest in peace, and how many perished from alcohol flooding. Say what? Number 10. A student designed the present-day American flag and received a B- for his grade. In 1958, as Hawaii and Alaska were on the verge of being admitted as states to the U.S., history teachers across the nation assigned their students to create a new flag with 50 stars. One Ohio student named Robert G. Heft enthusiastically took on the project and used his mother's sewing machine, despite having no prior sewing experience, to craft the new American flag. Heft's design was straightforward. He staggered the stars to allow space for 2 additional stars. However, his design was deemed unoriginal and he only received a grade of B- for his project. In jest, his teacher quipped that he would give Heft an A if his flag was chosen. A year later, Heft received a phone call from President Eisenhower himself. Congress had selected Heft's design from over 1,500 entries. To this day, Heft's flag remains in use, and his teacher did indeed amend his grade to an A. Number 9. At one point, Pepsi had a military force that ranked as the 6th largest in the world. In 1959, President Eisenhower ordered an American National Exhibition to be held in Moscow, which marked one of the earliest attempts to introduce popular American brands to the Soviet Union. During the exhibition, attended by Richard Nixon and Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, the tense atmosphere took a turn for the worse as the two men began to argue. To ease the tension, Pepsi-Cola Vice President Donald Kendall offered Khrushchev a cup of Pepsi, which he drank, resulting in photos of him holding a Pepsi cup appearing in the newspapers the next day. This led to Pepsi becoming the first Western product to be sold and produced in the Soviet Union. As the decades passed, Pepsi's popularity continued to grow in the Soviet Union, eventually becoming a staple of Soviet society. However, the country could not afford to continue producing it, and in 1989, the Soviet Union offered Pepsi military equipment worth $3 billion in exchange for maintaining its facilities and distribution. Pepsi accepted the deal, receiving 17 submarines, a cruiser, a frigate, and a destroyer. This briefly made the company the owner of the 6th largest military on Earth, prompting Kendall to joke to the U.S. National Security Advisor that, "We are disarming the USSR faster than you." However, the material was ultimately sold to Sweden for scrap. In later years, Kendall revealed that he had arranged for Nixon and Khrushchev to argue as part of a marketing ploy. Nevertheless, for a brief moment in history, Pepsi doubled as both a food company and a military force. Number 8. The United States once had an emperor who was widely loved by the residents of San Francisco. In 1859, Joshua Abraham Norton sent a proclamation to the San Francisco Bulletin declaring himself Norton I, Emperor of the United States of America, as requested by a large majority of the citizens. He went on to list his occupation as emperor on the 1870 census and issued his own currency for use in the imperial government of Norton I. Despite having no real political power, Norton dismissed the governor of Virginia, dissolved Congress, and abolished the Union just before the Civil War. Nonetheless, the people of San Francisco embraced him with open arms. Police saluted him on the streets, and businesses displayed signs accepting his currency only from him, and sometimes even offered him free services. Despite dying destitute in 1880, Norton was given a grand funeral attended by 30,000 people who mourned their beloved emperor. Number 7. Richard Nixon drunkenly ordered nuclear strikes over the phone. Richard Nixon's presidency was marked by his well-documented dependence on alcohol and prescription medication, which often resulted in explosive outbursts. This was particularly concerning given his control over the world's largest nuclear arsenal, as reported by Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. One instance of Nixon's drunken behavior occurred shortly after his election, when he was heard telling Kissinger that they should nuke Vietnam. In another instance, after a U.S. spy plane was shot down by North Korea, Nixon ordered a tactical strike and even requested target recommendations before Kissinger intervened and halted planning until the next day when Nixon was sober. Even while discussing Cambodia in a pool over drinks, Nixon lost his temper and exclaimed, "Bomb the shit out of them." Ironically, on the day the administration came closest to nuclear war, Nixon was once again drunk and asleep during a nuclear alert. National Security Advisor Alexander Haig had to pretend to consult with Nixon, who was in a stupor, to avert a crisis. Ultimately, Haig sent a letter to the USSR in the president's name, and the crisis was resolved before Nixon woke up. Number 6. Theodore Roosevelt got shot during a speech, then kept talking. During his campaign for a third term in 1912, Theodore Roosevelt energetically worked on developing a third-party platform against the incumbent Republican William Howard Taft and the Democrat candidate Woodrow Wilson. While giving a speech in Milwaukee, a man named John Schrank, who had been following the campaign for thousands of miles, shot Roosevelt in the chest with a revolver. However, the bullet was slowed down by a 50-page speech and a steel glass case in his breast pocket, preventing it from being lethal. Despite being shot, Roosevelt coughed into his hand to check for blood and then addressed the crowd saying, "Friends, I shall ask you to be as quiet as possible. I don't know whether you fully understand that I have just been shot, but it takes more than that to kill a bull moose." He went on to deliver his speech for over 55 minutes, still wearing his blood-soaked shirt. Roosevelt spent 8 days in the hospital recovering from the gunshot wound, and although he suffered no ill effects, he lost the election to Woodrow Wilson. Number 5. A flood of molasses killed more than 20 people in Boston. In Boston, Massachusetts on January 15, 1919, a day before Prohibition was enacted, the final shipment of molasses meant for rum manufacturing was received. This last tank, measuring 50 feet tall and 90 feet in diameter, was left in the harbor during a lunch break taken by dock workers. Without warning, at 12:30 p.m., the tank suddenly exploded with a sound akin to a muffled roar. The explosion released around 14,000 tons of molasses, which rushed through the streets of Boston at about 35 miles per hour, devastating everything in its path: houses, buildings, and people. Tragically, 21 people lost their lives, and 150 were injured. The frozen pose of a wagon driver caught in the flow was later described as like a figure from the ashes of Pompeii. It took days to clean up the aftermath of the disaster, and the United States Industrial Alcohol Company was later forced to pay over $600,000, equivalent to about $11 million today, in damages. To this day, some locals claim they can detect a faint smell of molasses on hot days in the city. Number 4. Swashbuckling pirates and Puritans formed an unexpected alliance in colonial Massachusetts. During the 17th century, when the United States was just beginning to take shape, piracy was flourishing, and some of the most notorious pirates, such as William Kidd and Blackbeard, had established hideouts along the coasts. However, there was one pirate named Captain Thomas Cromwell who formed an unlikely alliance with the Puritans in the New World. According to Massachusetts Governor John Winthrop, Cromwell was blown into Plymouth Harbor with his crew of 80 men and a ship full of treasures recently looted from the Spanish, in what was later described as divine providence. While some, like William Bradford, disapproved of the pirates' drunken behavior, locals welcomed the crew's lavish spending, and the pirates even donated to the poor, as per Winthrop. After spending a few weeks in the area gifting Winthrop a splendid sedan, the pirates made their way up to Boston, where they received a warm welcome. The city was eventually labeled the common receptacle of pirates from all nations due to the pirates' favorable reception. Number 3. One life was lost during the Cuban Missile Crisis, but it ultimately saved the world from destruction. In October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis was intensifying as U.S. reconnaissance confirmed Soviet missile sites near the U.S. mainland. Pilot Rudolph Anderson Jr. was testing an unarmed U-2 spy plane when he was unknowingly spotted. Soviet Lieutenant General Stepan Grechko ordered the plane shot down without waiting for approval from the commanding officer, which could have started a nuclear war. After Anderson's death, President John F. Kennedy was urged by military officials to retaliate. However, he was concerned about the potential for escalation, saying, "It isn't the first step that concerns me, but both sides escalating to the 4th or 5th step, and we don't go to the 6th because there's no one around to do so." Kennedy contacted Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev, who denied authorizing the shootdown. The leaders realized the situation was escalating out of control, and the crisis was peacefully resolved. The world's most destructive war was averted with only one casualty. Number 2. One of the USA's first wars was with pirates. To understand the origin of the line, "To the shores of Tripoli" in the Marines' hymn, one must look at the Barbary Wars, which were among the first wars fought by the newly independent United States. During the American Revolution, ships sailing near the Barbary coast of North Africa were frequently attacked by corsairs, or local pirates and privateers. After gaining independence, the U.S. declined to pay tribute to the corsairs, prompting President Thomas Jefferson to team up with Sweden for the First Barbary War from 1801 through 1805. This conflict ended with the capture of Derna in Tripoli, which marked the first time the U.S. flag was raised on foreign soil. Despite the signing of a treaty in 1805, the Corsairs broke it, leading to a second Barbary War in 1815, which lasted only 9 months and effectively ended piracy in the area. Number 1. The U.S. government poisoned alcohol supplies to stop bootleggers. In the era of Prohibition, the U.S. government prohibited the manufacturing and sale of alcohol. However, this didn't stop people from drinking. They resorted to illegal avenues such as speakeasies and smugglers to get their fix. Those wanting to participate in bootlegging often produced their own beverages, sometimes by distilling industrial alcohol to create something drinkable. To counteract this illegal activity and the growing power of organized crime syndicates taking advantage of the alcohol ban, law enforcement and regulators resorted to drastic measures. They ordered that poisonous substances be added to the industrial alcohol production to disrupt bootlegging at its source. Despite these efforts, people continued to manufacture and consume illicit beverages, leading to numerous deaths from contaminated products. On New Year's Day in 1927, 41 individuals lost their lives at a New York hospital due to the government's toxic campaign.